We've talked a lot on this channel about how I strongly dislike, especially large companies that may or may not rhyme with schmet or schmelp, that use therapy as a means for lining their own pockets, oftentimes to the detriment of their consumers. And this is another way that CBT is just like really not my favorite thing. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist and we talk about therapy things on this channel. And today we're talking about something that quite frankly I thought y'all would be too bored of for me to talk about. I made an offhanded comment in a video recently about how I'm not a CBT's biggest fan, and a lot of you, like, there were dozens of comments, asked me to talk about CBT and to sort of expand on that a little bit. So we're doing that today. Before we get into that though, I do want to be super clear that CBT is an evidence-based modality. It's a safe modality. It is entirely possible for people to be effective and safe and good and fun therapists and to practice CBT. So please don't misunderstand. This is not me saying that no one should practice CBT or that it's impossible for people to have growth or healing. I am very much a firm believer in the idea that there is a therapist for everyone, and some people are really just like a good fit for CBT, and so those people deserve help and healing and all those things just as much as the rest of us who don't resonate with CBT. So again, I just want to be clear, I don't have beef with CBT therapists. Please don't be in my comment section telling me that I'm saying that no one should practice CBT or should use CBT, because that's not true. That's not what we're doing here. This is more so like my personal opinions and musings about like why I as a clinician have sort of veered away from CBT. Okay, the first reason that I want to talk about why I don't like CBT is that to me, CBT can be very invalidating, right? For those of you who don't know, the basic premise of CBT is like a little thought triangle thing. I'll put a diagram up on the screen. The basic premise being that in this triangle are our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. The, core premise of CBT is that if we change your thoughts, we can then affect your resulting emotions and therefore your actions. And this becomes the vehicle for healing and moving past like any number of mental illnesses in CBT. The problem that I take with this is that it's not quite as simple as just like thinking your way out of things like marginalization and oppression, right? If somebody's cognitive distortion, that's what they're called in CBT, is that the world sees me as inferior because of something like racism or sexism or ableism or any of the isms, then like what the fuck are we supposed to do with that? You know what I'm saying? Like it can feel very invalidating as a clinician to be like, don't think that. It reminds me very much of when people say things to me about like, you're not fat, you're beautiful. And like, first of all, and both, thank you. But second of all, just telling someone something that like is so obviously not true is not helpful, right? For me as a clinician to sit down with somebody and say, the world doesn't think that about you. Let's address your cognitive distortions about the way that the world is discriminating against you. It's kind of like, hello? Like what world are we living in? And I think there's also an aspect of acknowledgement that I have to have as a person who experiences a variety of privilege in my life. It doesn't feel good to be a clinician who's like, just don't think that about your trauma or your marginalization, right? Like that sucks. There is a world, I suppose, where we can reframe these cognitive distortions to be that like the world may sometimes see you as inferior, but that's not reflective of your true worth. And so we're trying to readjust your thoughts in that way. This is why I said also that it is entirely possible to be a CBT therapist who's like good at this and that this resonates for your clients. I think there is a world where you can address this issue. But for me, it's just not really like something that I'm interested in doing because again, I think for my own personal practice, I find it more helpful to like level set and be clear about like, yes, like that is a real thing, right? And it's not my place to tell you that you're not allowed to feel that way. And so my practice tends to lean a lot more towards like, yes, and, right? Like, yes, this is a state of affairs. And also there are things that we can do, that we can discuss, that we can incorporate into your life that will allow you to reclaim your joy, your peace, your love and community, like all of these things so that you're not having to contend with the impact of oppression and marginalization every single moment of every single day for the rest of your fucking life, right? Like that to me feels like a much more realistic approach to discussing what is actually a very valid reaction to being marginalized and oppressed and discriminated against. This is especially true in regards to trauma, especially like chronic trauma, CPTSD, that kind of a thing. Because for those of you who don't know, trauma is not just simply like my brain does funny things now that I've been traumatized. It's not just about your thoughts, right? Trauma involves our body, it involves our nervous system and like somatic experiences. And while I'm not necessarily like the guy to like champion somatic experiencing either, I think that's valid too, but I'm not I'm not like pitting CBT against somatic experiencing is what I'm saying. But the point that I'm making here is that I don't think, for me in my practice, focusing solely on the cognitive distortions related to trauma is particularly helpful, right? We're going to talk later about the top-down aspect of things. This is very true of CBT, that we start top literally with your thoughts, and then like we'll address the rest of it later, right? I personally have run into issues with this, and I just really don't like or resonate with this perspective personally, especially because my education is in social work. I find a holistic approach to trauma healing, particularly CPTSD, to be more effective and to also be more like integrating, right? It feels odd to me that I would address somebody's cognitive distortions. Again, I'm using quotes, by the way, because I don't like the phrase cognitive distortions either, because it sounds like what you're saying is that your brain did something wrong in response to, again, what is actually like a very valid reason to be upset. So I don't love that either. That's a nitpicky note. Anyways, the point that I'm making is that I find it more of a holistic approach and a more helpful approach to be addressing all of these things simultaneously, right? To be trying to encourage people to be present with their nervous system, with their body, and also to be aware of thoughts, feelings, emotions, that inner monologue that's coming up, and to try to do that work in a more like whole-bodied way rather than like we'll start here and address the rest of it later. One last note about this, which is that in CPTSD recovery or PTSD recovery, even just like a particularly poignant trauma work, it can be really hard to try to address like the cognitive aspect of things without doing the nervous system aspect, because essentially what we're trying to do is like logic override your nervous system screaming at you, right? Like this is a very difficult thing to do. And for a lot of people, this can also result in discontinuing maladaptive coping mechanisms that then leave you with nothing to replace that, right? And so somebody might find themselves in a position where we have successfully discontinued these like maladaptive coping strategies, but because you have nothing to continue, now you feel fucking awful, right? Like we basically have just removed your ability to successfully interface with the fact that your nervous system is screaming at you and been like, good job, gold star. And that feels very dysregulating, right? That's very scary. And for a lot of people, this is the reason that using CBT to treat complex trauma is like fucking ew, right? Like there was a fair amount of people in my comment section who had expressed that like trying to do this work for them was like really just not the move, and it actually made them feel worse. Don't get me wrong. There is a conversation to be had about how we will get to a place where like sometimes healing has to get worse before it gets better, and like that's very normal. And also, for me as a clinician, it's enough to be like, I'm doing something else. Also, as a secondary note, sorry, really quick, I forgot to mention that also with CPTSD, if you've tried CBT and you're like, ew, and you're curious about what other modalities might be useful, most common approaches for chronic trauma or PTSD are going to be somatic experiencing, DBT, EMDR is also a great one. Folks have a lot more positive experiences with these, again, because we're not simply focusing on just the logical or cognitive aspect of these things, and they're more like a full-bodied experience. Before we talk about the second reason that I don't like CBT, I want to talk to you guys about something that I love, which is this week's sponsor, EarthBreeze. For those of you who don't know, EarthBreeze is a liquidless laundry detergent. These things are kind of wild, honestly. Let me show you one. They are literally just little sheets of laundry detergent. They look like a dryer sheet, but they're not. They're super easy to just tear and put into your laundry. Aaron and I have been loving these because they're really good at washing our clothes and with like stains and things like that. But I have sensitive skin, for those of you who don't know, and so I'm very picky about laundry detergent. And while this is really good at washing my clothes, it's also very gentle on my skin. EcoBreeze is also a super convenient option, both because it's not bulky and heavy in your laundry room, but it also can be delivered to you on a subscription service right to your door, which of course I love. We all know that I'm busy and I don't really like going to the grocery store anyways, so I love that this just comes right to my door. It doesn't take up any space, and it's just super easy to use. I think the thing that I love about EcoBreeze the most, though, is that they're an environmentally friendly brand who helps me to reduce my plastic waste. Learning that 500 million different detergent jugs end up in landfills every year was like a little bit jarring to me, and I love that these tiny sheets can help me not add plastic into our ecosystem. The fact that EarthBreeze comes in paper packaging, also the actual envelope that they send you in the mail is paper packaging also. So I love that EcoBreeze helps me to make a more environmentally friendly decision that also is like super easy. If it's not clear already, I'm obviously a big fan of EarthBreeze, and I think that you will be too. So go click that link in my description and go to earthbreeze.com/Mickey. You can get started with 40% off. Earthbreeze.com/Mickey will get you 40% off of your subscription. Go show EarthBreeze some love for showing me some love. Thank you again to EarthBreeze for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in. Okay, Okay, the second reason that I really am not a fan of CBT is that it can be really rigid. It's sort of famous for being a very manualized modality. I think for a lot of people, the image that they conjure up in their minds about CBT is like worksheets and homework assignments and like the sticker chart thing, right? And this for a lot of people is really limiting and can also feel infantilizing and a little bit like constraining. Part of the reason that I really don't like this about CBT is that for me, it feels like a barrier in building rapport, especially like giving clients the space to be flexible and not really being super rigid about this like structure or this like manualized type of thing allows us the space to really get to know one another and to develop that feeling of familiarity and safety that like we know from the research is integral in actually healing and like doing the work, right? For those of you who don't know, there's a lot of interesting research about how the relationship between client and therapist, like the appropriate boundaried therapeutic relationship between client and therapist is actually one of the most reliable predictors for whether or not somebody's going to be successful, quote unquote, in therapy, which is also why it's important for therapists to just choose modalities that resonate with them, evidence-based modalities that resonate with them, because having this easy back and forth and like healthy rapport building between client and therapist is going to go a lot further than forcing yourself to use a modality that like, even though it's evidence-based, really does not work for you or for your client. The other aspect of this, the like rigidity here that's important to point out in my opinion, is that this creates an opportunity for the like high achieving gold star student people, the intellectualizers especially, to sort of skirt around like the actual work that we want to be doing. I know for me as a clinician and as a client, this became an issue for me where like, if you give me homework, I'm going to do it. If you give me a worksheet, I'm going to fill that bitch out, right? But I'm not really going to think very deeply or especially feel very deeply what's going on for me on a somatic level, on like a deeper emotional level, because I'm just going to be like, I did the worksheet, right? Like, give me an A, give me an A. And this can become a problem for folks who are particularly used to this way of being. And so again, because a lot of the clients that I work with tend to be in like similar little like demographic pools. I know about the work that I'm doing that this is not like even an opportunity that I want to be creating. So I just like avoid it altogether for that reason. The other aspect of this rigidity that is a little frustrating to me is the norm that it can sort of like put therapists up on high, right? Like there is an aspect of like authority or like hierarchy that exists in CBT therapy that I personally really fucking dislike. My therapeutic style tends to lean much more towards a guiding style. The way that I describe this to my clients is that I conceptualize therapy and the work that we're doing together as you being in the driver's seat of a car and me being in the passenger seat, right? Like I'm here to be the navigator and to like manage the music and to like, give you a heads up or tell you when there's something coming, on an exit on the highway or whatever, but I'm not driving the car, right? This is not my show. This is not my rodeo. I'm here to provide you the support and resources that you need to be successful at what you're doing. But ultimately, this journey is yours. I don't like being positioned as like the authority figure, like A, because it's not my fucking life and I don't think that's fair, but B, because it's more important for clients to have that sense of achievement, in my opinion, for themselves at the end of a healing journey, that like you aren't going to say at the end of this, like, you did this for me, right? Because like you did it for you. You did all of this work. I was here, obviously, to help you and to guide you. That's the role of a clinician. But this like dynamic in CBT where therapists are like, and now we're going to do this, and now you're going to do that. It just is like very bothersome to me. And I really don't like it. This power structure, also, I think it goes without saying, this is an issue that can exist with like good or bad therapists. And this is sort of, well, that's not true. That's not what I meant to say. This is a dynamic that can exist regardless of modality. It's more like if you're a bad therapist thing. But it's worth mentioning here. This power dynamic can be used inappropriately and unethically, obviously. And it can also be a reason that people get driven away from therapy, right? Like this is something that is like personally very close to my heart. We talked about this with the BetterHelp situation, which is that when somebody's first experience or first couple of experiences with therapy are bad and you're made to feel infantilized and stupid and like your therapist is running the show because surely you could never be allowed to drive your own car of healing, then there's a high likelihood that people are not going to want to come back, right? There's an aspect of like courage and humility that it takes to show up to therapy in the first place. And in my opinion, having somebody tell you that you're not qualified to heal yourself is like really not going to help. I know that for some people, having the guiding or the more like directive style is particularly helpful. And again, this is why there's a modality and a therapist for everyone. And it's not to say that this is bad, but again, for me, not my bag. The third reason that I really don't like CBT, and I know that this is going to be a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but hear me out. Before you leave me a hate comment, let me get through the section. I think that it can become a crutch for new therapists. And I know, again, this is going to be like an unpopular opinion. And I'm not just saying this because like I've seen it happen one time or because it happened to me. And this did kind of happen to me, to be clear. And I'm not just saying it for that reason, but because I think there are some systemic issues in regards to the way that therapists are trained generally. I think we have to acknowledge, we need to acknowledge that the way therapists are educated is primarily a fear-driven education. There is a lot of chit-chat in grad school and in licensure training and all of this stuff about like covering your ass, about managing your liability, and about upholding ethics and rules and statutes and all of these things above all else, right? And don't get me wrong, I think this is important, right? This is like a central part of the work, being safe, and in therapists being good therapists. And I think that new therapists, when you don't know what you're doing, when you're feeling like you're adrift and you're confused and everybody else knows fucking way more about therapy than you do, there's a pull that a lot of people experience. I experience this. Lots of my colleagues experience this, where you want to gravitate towards the things that are labeled as like safe, no matter what, right? CBT gets like the rap as being like the most evidence-based modality that is the safest, that is like, again, also very manualized. It's very easy to pick up as a new therapist. There's very little nuance, right? I don't really have to think very deeply about what my client is saying or if they're providing me a new or surprising or like, an experience or a report that I hadn't really considered before, because before we did this session, I knew that I was going to sit down and talk with you about an automatic thought record. So we're not really doing that, right? I don't have to wade through the indecision and the fear of like existing in this gray area. Our work together is going to be very carefully guided by me giving you this worksheet, you filling it out, us talking about the worksheet, next worksheet, right? And again, I don't think that this is bad. I think it is entirely possible for therapists to do this in a way that is intuitive, that's honoring of your clients, that doesn't just like ignore what your clients are telling you. And for new therapists, because there is such a fear-driven education, it is entirely possible, if not common, for therapists to get sucked into this trap of like, I don't want to wade through the indecision and the nuance of a style that's less manualized and less rigid, right? The thing about this is that it's very much like the difference between therapy in theory and therapy in practice, right? A lot of clinicians like fresh out of grad school will talk about how like nobody prepared me for some of the things that my clients say to me or these situations that I was just like not equipped. And it's because you can't account for human nature, right? Like there is no way to educate therapists about every possible outcome, every possible self-report, every potential situation. That's not a thing, right? And it's very distressing and scary to be put in this situation where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And I think that's valid and that's important. But to me, the work in becoming like a great clinician is about being able to balance these simultaneous concerns for evidence-based practice, for upholding your ethical and moral and legal obligations, and also honoring the nuance that shows up for clients in saying or doing or needing things that weren't in a textbook, right? I think there is a lot of growth to be had for clinicians to choose to walk through this discomfort of like, this is not something that would necessarily be reported as like the perfect choice clinically in a textbook. And this is still something that, again, is upholding evidence-based practice, is upholding my ethical and moral and legal obligations, and is also the most validating and helpful thing to my client right now in this moment. CBT can be kind of a crutch for new therapists in the way that it allows us to sort of breeze past that nuance and that difficulty and just say, like, I'm clinging to my to my workbook, I'm clinging to my manual, because I'm afraid, because I don't want to get sued, because I don't want to lose my license, because I don't want to hurt my clients, right? Except that in doing this, sometimes it can mean that you are clinging to ethics and evidence-based practice and your modality and your manual at the cost of your client feeling validated and feeling really seen. This is not to say that people who practice CBT are bad therapists. Again, I think I've made this disclaimer like 83 times, and I know it's because there's going to be people pearl clutching in my comments. I want to be clear. You can be a good therapist who uses CBT and honors all of these things. And I think it can be a stumbling block for new therapists, and it can be a way that they find themselves stuck and that they don't have the space or make the space for themselves to walk through what is actually a really difficult piece of growth as a clinician, which is like juggling all of these simultaneous plates and doing that effectively. Just as a really quick example before we close out this section, I think the perfect encapsulation of this to me is self-disclosure. This is something that therapists get bonked over the head with a lot in grad school about like, no self-disclosure, don't talk about yourself, right? And like for new therapists, the tendency is going to be to never talk about yourself, never share anything about yourself. Don't tell your clients anything that has to do with you as a person because my professors in grad school said that it's not safe and because the NASW Code of Ethics says that you shouldn't, right? Except that the proper use of self-disclosure in a session can actually be a transformative moment in regards to rapport building and in regards to your client feeling safe with you, right? This is why, for example, I feel really strongly about making the content on the channel that I do because it's important for clients to see therapists as people in some regard, right? There's obviously an importance for healthy boundaries and things like that. And your client knowing that you're not a like up on high, removed from reality, perfectly self-actualized robot of a person can go a long way in them feeling safe to tell you these like really deep and traumatizing or scary things, right? It's a trust building exercise. And so when we learn how to do it correctly, it can be really transformative in a session. And so the parallel that I'm trying to draw here is that in the same way that new therapists can say, I'm never self-disclosing anything ever, and then lose out on the transformative benefits of the proper use of self-disclosure, we can also have a similar issue happening with CBT, right? Where like, because I'm never going to explore or even dip my toe in this water of having to balance all the nuance of these things, I will then lose out on the potential benefits of doing that correctly. The last reason that I am not a super fan of CBT is that I personally think it's been co-opted by capitalism. We've talked a lot on this channel about how I strongly dislike, especially large companies that may or may not rhyme with schmetter schmelp that use therapy as a means for lining their own pockets, oftentimes to the detriment of their consumers. And this is another way that CBT is just like really not my favorite thing because it's almost a meme at this point that a lot of folks who have like health insurance through their jobs and things like that, you know, will have like X amount of therapy sessions covered under their plan with an approved therapist, right? You have to go see this therapist. And the reason that, not the reason, but a fair amount of the reason why this happens is that we use evidence-based practice, not we, insurance companies use evidence-based practice to try to estimate how long it will take someone to finish work on a thing, right? We use sometimes CBT as the metric for saying you don't need more than 8 sessions to work through an issue. Your CBT therapist is going to give you a manual, right? You're going to read Mind Over Mood with your therapist, and in 8 weeks' time, get the fuck out, right? Like, you don't need any more time than that. We're not paying for any more than that. And I personally take issue with this. I think I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but like the commodification of mental health and like therapy is irritating, just like generally, but it's also a tool of oppression, right? This becomes a thing where like we're not doing or we're not providing our employees or like our populace at large with the resources to work on their mental health because it's good for them or because we have a basic sense of compassion for our fellow human, but rather because you being mentally well means that you'll show up at work more consistently and you'll probably be more productive at work. And so therefore I am going to provide you with the absolute fucking bare minimum amount of help and resources that I can in order to eke the most positive benefit out of you. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, again, that I hate this and I think it's gross. And so for that reason, I'm also not a super fan of CBT. Not that this has anything to do with like the inventors or like even the clinicians who practice CBT believing in this modality or this like paradigm necessarily, but it is still like an inextricably linked value with things like CBT, again, because it is very manualized, because it does have a very like structured ABC 1, 2, 3 kind of affect. And so again, for me, this is another reason that I'm just really not a fan of it, because for me in my own personal clinical work, clients are going to take as long as they take to heal, right? It's a difficult thing to predict, right? It's not necessarily something that I can put on a piece of paper that like in X amount of sessions, you will achieve X amount of percentages of like improved mood or ability to cope with XYZ situation. It's amorphous in that way. And I've talked ad nauseum on this channel about how I'm frustrated with the expectation that therapists can just keep clients forever and ever, because that's not ethical either, right? It's not healthy or safe for us to create a dependency where our clients need us to function. And again, this is one of those things where you have to balance multiple things being true at the same time, which is that putting clients on a very strict timetable to say you get 8 to 12 sessions and then you're out of here, whether or not your work is done, get the fuck out of my office, is not helpful. There's also, I think, like an aspect of like a watched pot never boiling. That's neither here nor there, but the point that I'm making is that CBT has very much been co-opted by capitalism to be then more so a tool of oppression than it is actually a tool of healing in some ways. And so again, for me personally, that's enough to feel like, I don't really want to use this modality. I know that there are going to be people who, feel very strongly about CBT being useful and valuable to them. And again, I want to be clear, that's fine, right? There is a therapist and a modality out there for every particular person in a particular situation. That's why we have so many modalities and resources and like therapeutic styles. That's important. And also, I do want to talk about this, because you guys asked me, but also because I think it's good learning for clients and therapists alike to honor that CBT can sometimes be more of a hindrance than it is a help for our clients. And especially if you've experienced like CBT not working for you or CBT making things worse, please know that it's not that you did therapy wrong. It's not that you suck or that you're not trying hard enough. It might just be that CBT was really not a good fit for you for all of the reasons that I already listed. And that's super valid, right? There are lots of therapists with lots of different perspectives, using lots of different modalities that can probably help you in a much more effective way. So that's it. I know you guys are going to have comments and feelings. Please let me know what you guys' thoughts are in the comment section. I'm always available for that. And that's it. If you guys like the video, you can like the video, subscribe, because we do make content like this, and we also do a cute pop culture moment that I'd love to have you stay for. And then you can share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.